Now that we have studied the basics of color temperature, ISO, shutter speed, aperture, and different kinds of light, we need to learn how to use light creatively. As we've all learned that photography is writing with light, and therefore, if we use light properly, we can get the pictures we desire. Mr. Saravanan Janakarajan is going to explain to us about the creative use of light and how to render photographs in different kinds of light. Over to Mr. Saravanan Janakarajan.
Today, in this session, we learn about creative use of light in photography. We learn about using light in different situations of the day and how to use them creatively to get different effects to your photograph. We'll look at various examples by which you can use light creatively in your photographs. This session we are going to do on the creative use of light. Now, as we understand, photography is the art of capturing light creatively. So light is the most important aspect of photography. You can have great subject, you can have great landscapes and all these scapes, but if there is no light, proper light, you will not be able to get a good picture. So there are certain genres where you can control the light, like studio, people portrait, weddings, etc., where you can use artificial lights and you can light up the subject as you want. But there are times like in wildlife photography where you have no control on lights, and this is where you have to use the light creatively and make attractive images. We will look at the creative use of light with wildlife photography as an example. In wildlife photography, we have to use the available light during various times of the day, and we can click different types of pictures. So we'll start with the sunrise, and sunrise and sunset are the best times to shoot silhouettes, what we call as silhouettes, where the details of the subject are not very clear, but you get great backgrounds and you get a very aesthetically nice looking picture. Then we have just after sunrise and before sunset is the time for rimlets. Rimlets are very similar to silhouettes, where you don't get great details, but you get a very nicely lit a picture of an animal where the light is only on its edges. In the mid-afternoon is a time to shoot. Actually, not many people shoot in mid-afternoon, but you can shoot great rimlet from top if you use the light creatively. Just after the sunset, we have a very nice light in the sky with no shadows on the subject, and this is the twilight time, and you can try a lot of creative expressions like slow shutter and portraits at this time. We can use flash at any point of time to fill the shadows, and usually flash, if it's used, is used in during after sunrise and in mid-afternoons to fill in the shadows. Let's look at the silhouette technique. Here the subject is between the camera and the sun. This will render the subject completely dark, and this subject will look nice in an orange colored frame. A setting sun or a rising sun behind the subject makes it ideal. So how do we do this? The setting for silhouette is very simple. You need to dial in a negative exposure in your camera. It could be -2 or -3 depending on the light available, but you need to dial in a negative exposure. Then keep the white balance at the hottest, where you have in good DSLRs you can control the white balance in terms of Kelvin. So it has to go above 8000. So I would recommend going to the top number which a camera gives, like 10,000 or above, and keep the ISO as low as possible. Then you have to look at the metering. You have evaluative metering which you can use because you have already underexposed, or you can use a spot, but I would always recommend the evaluative in wildlife photography. And this is the kind of picture you will get. This is a result because your underexposure is going to render the picture darker, the light is right exactly behind the subject, thereby the subject will go into shadows, and since you have kept a white balance at hottest, the picture will turn into orange or yellowish shade. And since your ISO is low, you will see very little noise on this. The evaluative metering will ensure that the camera reads light from all parts of the frame and thereby render a proper exposure to the picture. We can also combine silhouette with some action where you can see the birds flying against the sun. Here we have the same exposure settings which we did for proper silhouette, but here the ISO needs to be slightly higher because we need a little bit of higher speed to capture action in silhouette settings, and keep the ISO higher, let's say about 1000, so that you can get the action speed for the action, and thereby you can capture action like this, where against the sun, a bird flying against the sun will render itself into a beautiful image. We can also do silhouette not only against sun but also against the moon. Here the trick is to do spot metering, and to do a spot metering on the moon, not on the subject. So you will have to keep your white balance to the coolest. Now here you go completely opposite to what we did against the sun. Now here you go to 2500 or 3000 white balance Kelvin, and you do the spot metering on the moon. See, the advantage in doing a silhouette is that you don't have to have the bird or the subject in great focus, and you don't need a very sharp subject. You need the moon as sharp as possible. So you do a spot metering on the moon. That itself will tell the camera what the exposure should be, and keep a slightly higher f number. Thereby you will get more elements sharper, and this will give you an image where it will be bluish in tone, and your subject will be in shadows, but your moon will be properly exposed. The next creative use we are going to look at is the rim lit. Now, as the name suggests, rim lit, the rim or the edges of the subject will be lit in a very creative manner to give a very beautiful photograph where the subject is dark but you will get the edges very bright. Now, for this, the difference between a silhouette and rim lit is that the sun still has to be behind the subject but at an angle, at a 45 degree, 30 degree angle, so that you can then cover the edges of the subject in light, but the main subject still remains in dark. So this is the position where the subject is between the sun and the camera, and the sun is slightly above the subject in terms of at an angle to render the subject dark but light up the edges of the subject. The best subjects for this are animals or people with a lot of hair, because the hair is what gets lit in the photograph. So animals like monkey, bear, or even darter birds or bigger birds which have a lot of feathers on them, they are great subjects for this. This is how a rim lit picture will look like, where you can see that the bird is completely in shadow. There is not much detail you can see on the bird, but you can see the edges of the bird very properly lit with a nice edge on the bird. Now, to do this, we have to follow the technique where the sun is at a particular angle to the bird. This can be done in the afternoon also. In the afternoon, again, the sun is on top, so the bird below can be creatively lit. And here again, it's very similar to the silhouette. The white balance has to be as high as possible, and you have to underexpose the frame. How much underexposure depends on the light, but usually a -2, -3 will be necessary. And the white balance has to be as hot as possible. So 10,000 is a good white balance. And this is the kind of pictures you can get in both afternoon and during the sunsets. The next technique we are looking at is the slow shutter. Slow shutter is the technique in which we'll be reducing the speed of the camera deliberately to get a motion blur or a tailing effect, as we call that. Now, the reason why we need to do this is to capture not only the subject but also a trail of the subject to give as an effect of its motion or action. This is easier to achieve as the sun sets because the light is less and the camera naturally goes slow. If you are trying to do this in, let's say, in the mid-afternoon, you will not be able to achieve it even at an ISO of 100, and even if your aperture is at the highest number possible of, let's say, 36 or 42, still you will not be able to get that kind of slow shutter. Then you'll have to put a lot of filters in front to cut the light down. So slow shutter is best done when the sun is setting, when the light is low, and you can deliberately reduce the camera's speed. Usually a slow shutter is done using a tripod or a beanbag. The reason is that the camera shake should not affect the picture. Now these are the kind of pictures you can get with a slow shutter, where you have the body of the subject still, and whatever is moving in the subject, gets you an effect of motion. Or sometimes the body is still and the head alone moves. So all these kind of creative pictures you can get at slow shutter. The other time to click great portraits is the twilight time, just as the sun has set and there is still light in the sky. Usually the light is orange or pinkish. This is best time to shoot birds in water because the water is rendered with colors of orange and pink. Against the usual blue waters, now you will get orange and pink shades in water. Now this is the kind of pictures you will get in twilight time, where the water has a beautiful color, and the more colorful the bird, the better. You will also be able to see details on the bird because there is no sun to put shadow on the bird. So the light is ideal for shooting portraits and especially for birds in water. That the fill light can be added to shoot in mid-afternoons and wherever there is a shadow on the subject, and this fill light will ensure that the details are exposed properly and creative exposures can be planned using fill light. So here this is a shot done in mid-afternoon, and if you see there are no shadows on the bird, this is because flash was used, and the flash filled the shadows on the bird which was caused by the sun. So creative use of light is what we saw in this session, and as a wildlife photographer, the light can be used creatively throughout the day. It is not necessary that you shoot only one type of pictures throughout the day. In the morning you can start with a portrait and end up with a silhouette in the evening and finish with owling in the night. And whenever you are having a lot of shadows, you can always use flash to fill in the shadows. And flash has always to be used when there is good sunlight. So flash should not be used in complete darkness in wildlife photography. And it is always important to position yourself in the right way. In the morning when you're shooting portrait, you have to be with the light, and when you're shooting silhouettes, you have to be against the light. And you also need to use the camera features like white balance, exposure compensation, etc. to get a good result and create that suitable pictures.
In this video, we learned how to use light creatively while making our photographs. Of course, as photojournalists, we do not manipulate or distort reality, but we record it the way it is. However, the human eye sees things differently, and it is our ways of seeing that creates an impression. Therefore, look around yourself and see what are the lighting situations that surround you, and artistically, what kind of technique you would like to use to have a desired effect. I hope that you will try out all the suggestions that have been offered to you and explore the use of light creatively.